Welcome to episode 9 of Light on Leeds. Our guest this week was Bruce Davies. He runs an amazing scheme called Basement Arts Project in Beeston, where he shows art in the basement of his own actual house. The sound on this episode might sound slightly different because this is the first one that we've done from home. We had to take into all sorts of different elements because we live in a very busy street. We had to think about bin day. It was bin men coming day. It was also running the risk of listening to the ever-present ice cream van who didn't turn up. So just to give you a little heads up that this one might sound a little bit different than previous episodes. But Bruce was a fantastic guest and he spoke about art within the community. He's got all sorts of different amazing projects coming up. We will put links in the podcast notes so that you can check these things out yourself. Have a listen. Okay, so our next guest on Light on Leeds podcast is Bruce Davies. Hello, Bruce.
Hi there.
Can you tell me, Bruce, how long have you lived in Leeds?
It will be 20 years next September, so we've been in 19 years in Leeds.
And where were you originally from?
The Wirral.
Oh, okay.
Which, for the purpose of anyone who doesn't know that part of the world, is the little peninsula between Liverpool and Wales.
Okay.
So, most people don't know where the Wirral is. And when I came here, it was a case of, say, where you come from? Well, I don't know that. In the end, after a while, I started saying Liverpool.
It's just easier to say.
Yeah.
I've met people from the Wirral and they're very clear about the want to be addressed as being from the Wirral and not Liverpool.
Oh, yeah. There's a phrase as well, sort of plastic scouse.
Oh, really?
Which is how they refer to people from Liverpool refer to people from the Wirral. Wow,
because they're saying that they're not actually proper Liverpudlians.
Yeah.
Oh, so I suppose that's why the identity's become so sort of clear and strong.
I think so, yeah. I mean, there was also even a play that was done a few years ago called Brick Up the Tunnel.
Oh, really?
Which was a sort of humorous precursor to Brexit, really.
Yeah.
What would happen if we were cut off from Liverpool via the tunnel?
Should have all paid attention to that.
Yeah.
So how did you end up in Leeds?
Education. I went to art college 30-something years ago now, on the Wirral, but worked for a long time am I allowed to say that, Sainsbury's?
Yeah.
And I was doing that for a long time. In the end, I kind of just, I want to go back and redo something in education. I'd done art previously, and so I came to Leeds Metropolitan University, now Beckett's, to do it was called Art and Design at the time.
Okay.
Which kind of didn't really represent what that course was about, which was probably what led me to it. But looking back on it, I couldn't imagine doing a different course now.
Really?
Yeah.
So what was the difference?
Well, I guess the easiest way to describe the difference was that it kind of came a few years down the line when they decided that art and design was not the title for that course.
Right.
And for a while it became contemporary creative practice, which they then kind of I guess they thought it didn't have the word art in it, and so it might be confusing also. And then eventually they landed on contemporary art practice.
Right.
So it's almost like the thinking was going in two different directions at the same time. But I must say that contemporary art practice, CAP as it was a bit more descriptive as to how art and design always had been. It was using a lot of stuff that, I guess what people were calling new media and things like that.
Oh, okay, so like when you see video installations and sound and things like that.
Yeah. And the course itself doesn't exist anymore. I think that's probably fed by the idea that fine art practice and contemporary art practice were running along pretty much parallel lines. Mm-hmm. You'd go to the end of year shows at both places and you would be as likely to see video art installations on fine art as you would on contemporary art practice. equally you might find people doing painting on there than rather than the fine art practice. So I think there was a sort of like a general sort of merging of the ideas of both that kind of like led them to all become one larger course in the end.
Yeah, that's interesting, because then you've got a huge range, haven't you?
Yeah, and I think the sort of the nature of that course just kind of led me to the point that I'm at now.
Yeah, because you run Basement Arts. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so Basement Arts Project is, as it sounds, it is a project that's down in the basement. It's in the basement of the house where I live. I think that's one of the sort of like key features as to how we've managed to be around for the best part of 9 years really now. With a programme that's kind of like began in a fairly ad hoc way. The first ever project we did, I started to get interest from people wanting to do stuff in our space before they'd even actually seen it.
Really?
Yeah.
So, and do you think that's because there was a lack of places that facilitated that?
Certainly in Leeds, yeah. There is sort of like these periods of sort of like up and down. For 1 minute there'll be loads of places to do stuff, and then sort of gradually things get taken on and properties bought, so people move out of there, they move into somewhere else. There's periods where there's nothing available, so it's you're at the bottom end. And equally I've been around the city long enough now to sort of see this top end of that as well, where there's loads of places and activities. Really there's a lot of activity, and I think that one of the sort of one of the things that has allowed us to sort of do it over that time is the fact that we're doing it from our own property. So we're not in fear of sort of like unless us default on the mortgage or anything. No. We're not in fear of being thrown out tomorrow or anything like that.
So when you started the Basement Arts Project, did you have like an idea in your mind of what the ethos would be, or sort of what your remit was going to be, or was it quite sort of flexible?
I set out right from the start a kind of manifesto, I guess, as to the kind of things that were going to be top priority on anything that we would possibly do there. One of those things was to do with the artists, and that is to provide a space where artists, not necessarily who are in this city, but definitely, they would be sort of part of that programme of activity, would be able to do as much as they wanted without fear of being told to stop.
Yeah.
All bar ruining the fabric of the house itself.
Fair enough, yeah.
You're free to do whatever you want.
And that must be quite freeing, I suppose, for a lot of artists, is it?
It is, yeah. Also, people find it's a sort of challenging space to get into as well, because when you walk in there, you're confronted by bare bricks in places that are a bit damp in corners, and the back wall's just terrible. Don't use it in the winter at all.
Right.
Plaster that's crumbling. Every time we nail something in, a bit more plaster falls off the wall. There's dust everywhere. So people kind of have to accept that, I'm probably not going to be able to do just a plain old sort of painting show down here. People do exhibit paintings down there. They've exhibited photography down there and all sorts. But ultimately, they kind of accept that what we do here is sort of, there is limitations placed on us by the environment, which we can't get away from. But ultimately, if we think in a different way about it, in terms of how we present this work, then there's a different avenue you can go down.
Yeah.
So naturally, we sort of don't have work that people want to buy for that. Well, actually, we have sold some work that, that's people have wanted over the years. And we've bought work off artists as well, which remains in the ground floor of the house.
Oh, great.
But ultimately, we don't sort of produce sort of marketable work because people come and go, well, I can't do this, so I'm going to build something in here. And they usually build something that is site-specific. Quite often it has elements of the work that they're normally producing within it.
Right.
But they've sort of worked around that with about how they want to present the work. So quite often it takes on a sort of a particular aura of its own because of how they presented it instead.
Right.
So like, for instance, the current artist at the moment, a guy called Phil Hopkins, we work with him pretty much once a year, have done for about a decade now, even before I started the basement. His current exhibition, he normally works tiny. He works on found scraps of wood and things like that. Painting, installation, paintings and sculptures and things like that. But when we approached him about the current project, he was like, "Well, yeah, I want to do something really big. I want to do it as an installation." And so he's done that. He's filled these 2 rooms, and in one of them, he's actually built a house.
Wow!
So going out finding scraps of wood and things like that. He's actually he makes tiny little houses in matchsticks and things like that, which have always featured in his work for years. But he has this sort of like little diagram, and so every time he makes one of these houses, he can do it any size he wants. He'll scale it up, but it's always the same shaped house.
Wow.
And so now what we have is a house that is the same shape as the small ones that he makes, but it touches the ceiling.
Wow.
And fills the whole room.
And I suppose if you followed his work and you've seen that theme, that must be really interesting to see.
Yeah. It's funny with Phil because there's so many different sort of avenues he's taken over the years. And certainly for the last 10 years, I've kind of seen him diverge off into these sort of other avenues of sort of exploration.
Yeah.
But now to actually sort of bring him back, put him in these 2 rooms and sort of see what he would do over the course of, well, he had a month and a half to do the project down there, to see what he's done. There's so many elements of all of these different things from over the years all brought together. It's almost seeing like a retrospective of someone's work.
Yeah.
Only somehow the majority of it is new.
Yeah.
Because it's images and stuff just reappearing in newly made works, as opposed to just going back and taking something from the past.
Yeah.
And placing it in the context of a new thing. Apart from one object, which we actually managed to borrow from the Leeds City collection.
All right.
So Phil's been around for quite a long time. He was educated at Goldsmiths in the 80s. But he's always been very sort of, he's been always in Leeds. And has kind of dedicated himself to being in Leeds. He's an international artist in terms of, he does exhibitions in Germany and in America. He will do all these things, but ultimately he's sort of based his practice in Leeds and around living here. And one of the things is that he has work in the Leeds collection that they bought from him, I think, in the early 90s. It's this piece called I Fall to Pieces, which is a sort of an old-fashioned metal waste paper basket. It's all been painted black. And it's got loads and loads of shards of metal in it, filling it up to almost full. And then this little plane that he's made out of the same scraps of metal, just sort of bent and sort of placed on top of the stuff in the bin.
Oh, wow.
It's a really nice piece, but I was noticing as he was building this installation that waste paper basket that was in that earlier piece was sort of starting to crop up in drawings that he was doing for the current thing.
Oh, wow.
And so between us we kind of like concocted this scheme to get the old one out of storage and shown again.
Oh, that's brilliant. So how does it work on sort of a day-to-day level, because it's your house that you live in with your family?
It's not without its problems, but also that's kind of like part of the things that we try to acknowledge through doing it as well. Because I always have this sort of feeling that our interest in art probably comes from some kind of like experience we have with it when we're children. If you don't get that experience of it when you're a child, then you probably are never going to go with it later on in life.
Yeah, you won't come to it naturally yourself.
Yeah. It almost would take some like sort of road to Damascus conversion. The amount of times I have these kind of conversations and people sort of say, "Oh, I don't do art." It's like, what's that mean? What, you don't do art?
Is art so huge?
Yeah. The chairs you sit on, the computer you type on.
Yeah, they've all been designed.
They've all had this, at least a design element to them. So people are constantly thinking about even usability through, how a thing feels, how a thing looks, whether that works for certain people and not for others. And so I always find it a really sort of confusing thing, because you think, well, okay, so then you're unable to sort of process that as why you would like something as well. Something that doesn't necessarily have a purpose, but may just be of an interest to you if you, when you sit down and you listen to the radio, you hear some music, you go to the gallery and, okay, so maybe it's not a room full of Atkins and Grimshaws, but maybe I'm picking that up purely out of sort of like the sort of nostalgic element that sort of art quite often appeals to in people. But instead, what would you do if you were faced with a room full of Gerhard Richter, for instance? I can sit for hours in those rooms with the cage paintings down at Tate Modern. But people don't sort of seem to have that sort of thing as to, well, actually, maybe I need to sit down
and just absorb it a bit and see how you feel after looking at it.
Yeah. And so I kind of, the important thing I think with like what we do with Beeston, I guess this is the other element. So leaving aside the sort of how we want the artist to benefit from doing stuff with us, is how the public benefit from it. And I'm a great believer in, let's just put it in front of as many people as we possibly can. Something that's been made a big thing recently about is sort of the idea of access to art if you are in poverty. Now that's something that's been sort of like rattling around in my head for a long time, this sort of like this thing between, we have ideas that you can't access art maybe because of physical disability or some kind of impairments and things like that, but actually there's another aspect to this as well, which is poverty. And over the last few years, it's kind of come into my understanding as to how that actually works. So having conversations in the playground in South Leeds, where my children go to school, people would sometimes say to me, "So what do you do?" And I always say, first off, I work at the Henry Moore Institute. That's the other place that I work. That's the bit that earns me my money, because the basement sure don't. So I was thinking, that's an understandable thing. Working, and they say, "Oh, where's the Henry Moore Institute?" I said, "Well, it's the sculpture galleries that's next door to Leeds Art Gallery." And quite often, the response would be, very, very much the same in terms of people saying things like, "Oh, I don't really go into the city. I haven't been for years. The shops are cheaper out towards Morley, so we go there." And so I'm like, okay, so you only sort of like equate the city centre with shopping, so you want to go out, do shopping and get back. The idea of having some kind of cultural experience in the city centre would be sort of anathema to that thinking then. And so I was thinking, well, so therefore you're actually missing out on quite a lot, because there are cultural things in the city centre.
Certainly are.
But you're not doing it because you've never really thought of it there, because, to you it's, you need to just go and do the shopping and that's it. So my thinking was that, well, actually, if instead then, however you manage to do it, you put art at the heart of the community where you don't have to make that step. So you're not going out for another purpose. So it might be a Sunday afternoon or whatever, where you can literally just sort of step out, go for a short walk and go to a gallery, even if it's in someone's basement, experience a different kind of art, because it is going to be necessarily so, for no purpose other than just for something to do. For enjoyment. That is one of the ways that we could possibly sort of get around that whole thing of people not having access to it, because actually you're putting it almost on the doorstep for them. And do you feel that over the years you've noticed that you do get people who come in who maybe haven't accessed art before but are accessing it through Basement Arts Project? All the time. That must be really sort of fulfilling when that. It is, because the conversations that we have around it, I think, another one of the benefits of it being where it is and doing it how we do it from the house is that I'm always there on hand, and I can tell if people want to sort of just wander around and look at things and leave, and that's fine. But also if people have sort of questions because of them being in your house, they don't mind saying to you, I suppose it's not like what is this all about? It's not like sort of going to, if you've never been to an art gallery before, you could be quite intimidated, couldn't you, when you walk in? And even the people who are sat around, you might feel, they sort of seem more like security guards, even though they're not. And I think if you're not from that environment, that could probably seem quite intimidating. Whereas coming to yours, it's coming to your house, and they know that you live there, and it's almost like you've made it more comfortable already. You've made it more like an environment that they're used to seeing. I think that's true, and sort of, as well, it also kind of takes hold of one of these other sort of like age-old problems of how do you indicate sort of like when you can and can't touch things and stuff like that, because actually people coming into your house to do this kind of thing then have an automatic thing in their head of sort of like, I'm in someone else's house, I'm not going to touch this. And actually I find myself having to do that thing of like, oh no, you can, have a go with that if you want.
Yeah.
Whereas there's a weird thing in sort of like galleries, and I've found this through working with them, in them, is that people don't have that thing in the back of their head telling them don't. In actual fact, the voice is telling them do. But the reason is because they view certain things like, oh, this is sculpture, for instance, so it must be meant for us to be touched. Because look at it, it looks all sort of shiny and
it looks tactile.
Yeah, it looks tactile. I want to touch it because it's making me want to touch it. And so it kind of then seems a weird thing to have to say to sort of people, oh no, you can't touch that.
It's like pulling them into one, too, and then saying, but actually you can't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I have it myself. I'm looking at it. So, that does look like the kind of thing you just want to run your fingers over. Mm-hmm. I have a piece of marble on the table at the moment by an artist called Dominic Hopkinson. And it's a piece of Italian marble that he's carved, and one surface is really, really reticulated. What he's done to reticulate the surface, and really shiny, really sort of shiny channels, grooves carved into it. And I find myself there, sort of sat at the table and just, stroke it. Oh, it's up, yeah. But it's absolutely, I mean, Dominic wouldn't mind that, I don't think, somehow. And anyway, people who come, he's quite often, encourage people to sort of touch the surface of it. But you can't treat bronze the same way, for instance, there, because bronze, the more fingers that touch bronze, it will sort of, first it'll patinate, and then the sort of acids and stuff from your skin contact with it will, if they're left on the surface, start to eat away at it. So there are sort of these considerations.
Yeah, because I suppose you're changing the piece of art, aren't you, whilst you're touching it, and then you're changing the original nature of it.
Yeah.
Oh wow, it's really fascinating. So how often can people come and see? Does it depend, or is there certain opening hours that people can come? Do they have to check out your sort of social media to see what it is you're doing?
I mean, social media is the best and most up-to-date way of sort of keeping in contact with us. We do generally sort of, in exhibition time, we'll open Sunday afternoon, like 2 till 4, and then Monday and Thursday open all day, 11 till 2. So that's sort of like guaranteed, as long as there is an exhibition. It'll be on those times. And we do by appointment as well, so people can just sort of text or ring or email me and say, oh, can I come in on Wednesday evening or whatever? And I'll be like, yeah, sure. I
mean, that's, again, is just a great accessible way, isn't it? I mean, you wouldn't get that with an art gallery where you just ring up and say, can I just pop in on Tuesday evening? Yeah, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. And, and I think that has worked, because some exhibitions, that we've done have had more people come by appointment than have come by, through the door in a regular time. Purely because, and this is one of the things that I acknowledge, because I'm like it, I have to work 4 days a week in a job, so I can't be there to look after that, therefore I can't open it up. But also I acknowledge that sort of other people have to do that as well. And that's why I always think it's kind of like a really unfortunate thing, sort of having to sort of abide by opening hours and things like that. It's a bit exhausting to not to have no set opening hours, but ultimately when you look back at it, I mean, I've been doing this since April 2011 now, and for sort of mid-terraced house, it's seen quite a large number of people through the door.
Yeah, I bet.
I can tell you, it's seen 3,500 people through the door. 3,500
people, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think that comes from having that sort of like that additional thing of, well, if I'm around, I'll open it for you.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Because probably half of that you wouldn't have got if you hadn't have taken that sort of approach to it.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Wow. So have you got any sort of future plans that you can tell us about, or anything that's coming up? So we've actually got
the space booked up now until about, I think it's May 2021.
Really?
Yeah, and wow. I've got a couple of people at the moment who I'm sort of juggling with to try and sort of get them into slots, which will probably then actually take us up to about July of that year. This year it's been very much about Beeston and South Leeds actually, which is really unusual because we've, over the years we've done 2 shows in New York, we've done a show in Stockholm, we've been part of the Liverpool Biennial twice. We've done shows in Manchester, Sluice Art Fair down in London. So we do have always an eye on sort of, this is part of how we assist artists and promote them. We take part in art fairs or organise our own exhibitions elsewhere. Mm-hmm. But ultimately to have this sort of like underneath all of that, this constant programme in South Leeds, that addresses not just the art of Leeds, because we do have a lot of Leeds artists in our programme anyway. That's a sort of natural thing because we're unfunded, so it's a cost-effective way to do things if people are more local to the area, but also to bring in people from outside the area to just as part of that programme. So we kind of have the 2 things running in parallel, really.
You seem to have been getting more artists actually from South Leeds. So do you think that's just sort of a natural thing, or do you think you're attracting people because of where you're based, or does it seem like art's sort of spreading a little bit further?
I think there's a mixture of things going on. So when I look at this year's programme, there's instances of relocation. At least one person who's lived here all their life. Another person who was born here is currently at university somewhere else but has come back just for a year to find projects to get involved in before going back to their 3rd year. People who run them as businesses and run what they do as like a business, things like that. So I think there's a whole load of stuff going on. I think it's always there. I think it's just about, again, this thing of the longer you do something, the more you then start to tap into what the reality of the situation going on at that particular level is. And so more things start to sort of come out at you. So about 1.5 years ago, I started talking to a guy called Keith Ackerman. He's a stone sculptor, and he's currently working on this current project with us. But I started talking to him about it, and I said, next year, Keith, is the year of the Yorkshire Sculpture International, and I got a couple of ideas that I want to do that would sort of put us within what goes on as part of that. And so I'd seen an earlier sculpture by him, which was a sort of a tabletop sculpture in Leadmore marble it's called Jacob's Ladder. It's a kind of a staircase cut into the sort of this really rough piece of marble. This really nice sort of staircase in perspective. And so I said to him, I really like that piece. I'd worked with Keith before, but on another project that he did with us in the basement in 2015, which was also in marble. And I said, what I'd really like is to try and get that sculpture of Jacob's Ladder made so it's 8 foot high.
Wow.
So that didn't serve as a maquette or anything. There was no way that could possibly happen. The marble was so rough, you'd never get another piece of stone of any type that was anywhere near the same shape as that. Especially on such a large scale as well, because you'd probably have a nightmare getting out of the ground in that shape. But what we've done over the time, over the last sort of year, is been to a local quarry, and we've found a piece of limestone, which is about 10 foot, but we're going to have to sink a couple of foot under the ground for sort of
to get it to
steadiness and stuff, which will mean that the final sculpture is round about the 8 foot mark. And it's a very vertical piece of stone. It's not a sort of squat rock like the other one. It's really quite vertical, and we've started the job of cutting the channel for the staircase into this stone. And so Keith's working out at the quarry a couple of days a week, whenever he can. We've been part of Index Festival, which was kind of set up to run alongside the YSI. So whilst the Yorkshire Sculpture International looks at bringing international artists into the region, via Leeds Art Gallery or the Henry Moore Institute, Yorkshire Sculpture Park and Hepworth in Wakefield, Index kind of looks at sort of a mixture of those that are sort of already embedded within the scene, within the two cities, and then sort of the international artists that work with them.
Oh, great. So it's sort of getting two streams in, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yeah. Managing to sort of address both sides of that. And so with our project, which we're calling On the Corner, I've managed to get sort of 4 artists who are all very sort of different in the backgrounds and are also at very different stages of their career.
Oh, great.
So Keith Ackerman, who's doing the stone staircase sculpture, he came sort of relatively late to sculpting. Keith's now in his very early 60s, but he went to York College in recent years to learn how to sculpt in stone. One of the other people involved in the project is Dominic Hopkinson,
right,
who again is a stone sculptor, but actually was one of the people who was Keith's tutors.
Oh, wow. That's a really good link.
Yeah, it is, yeah. I've worked with both in the past, but actually that didn't occur to me, that connection, when I was thinking about the project, because I just knew I had these two things. And also Dominic donated a sculpture to us, and I said, well, in that case, I want to get that sculpture put in a public place so that everybody can see it, everybody can enjoy it, kind of thing. And so he's donated that to us, and we're looking at that as being another one of the 2 elements of this On the Corner project.
So it'll be public art?
It will be, yeah.
Both it's really exciting.
Yeah, it is. And both of them will be located literally within a minute from Basement Arts Project, where we are, on that corner, hence the title of the project. So it's on the corner of Dewsbury and Tunstall Road.
Yeah.
And then Phil Hopkins, who's currently the guy who's built the house down in the basement. There's been one more element to that, and that's Jadine Imbush, who she's a student at the moment. She took a year out from her university where she's studying down at Loughborough in order to be able to get involved in some actual sort of projects out there. She kind of came to me looking for things sort of like, to help an artist install their work maybe. But kind of like, because I had this On the Corner project in mind, it's like, well, do you want to take part in the actual project as an artist rather than as a technician? And so she's done a sort of a subtle sort of intervention on the ground floor of the house whilst Phil's downstairs,
right, to
do with temporary living. So it's all based around tents.
Right, which is very prescient at the moment, of course.
Yeah. Well, one of the questions, our On the Corner project is kind of split into two categories that come within the Yorkshire Sculpture International's like remit as to what they were looking about, this anthropology and this connection to the earth through making.
Excellent.
And so whilst Keith and Dominic are very much about this is about sort of haptic skills, the ability to be able to carve away at stone and get something out of it.
Yeah.
Making a connection that way. Jadine and Phil have been looking at this, the idea of how people are living.
Yeah.
So whilst Phil's taken it to the extreme and has built a sort of like ostensibly a sort of permanent living unit downstairs in the basement, Jadine was very much thinking about the sort of like the homelessness crisis at the moment. Something which affects not just South Leeds. It's had a big impact here, I think, but also the rest of the country as well. And sort of like the rise of sort of like, tent populations in places. And so with her project, what she's done is she's created lots and lots of little sort of tents. They're all different colours, different patterns on them, different sizes. And each day when we open up, I'll put them in different places around the kitchen.
Right. So
that they're never in the same place. So that, hopefully the sort of the exhibition is kind of like mirroring how it feels to be sort of like moved on from one thing, put in a box overnight and sort of put to one side, brought out again the next day, sort of wedged in between the computer and Dominic's stone on the table and all that kind of thing.
That's great, yeah.
And there's also a sort of sleeping bag that she's been hand stitching stuff into as well, which you can usually find sort of like perhaps tucked in the doorway to the basement, or something to stumble across or have to step over.
Yeah, exactly, which also again makes you think, doesn't it? Because it's that whole idea of, you become so used to seeing these people lying around on the streets that you kind of become desensitized to it.
Yeah.
Which is awful. So I suppose having an art installation that reflects that gives you time to think, and gives you time to think about it in a place where you're seeing it visually, but you're not, you're able to sort of stand back and take the emotion out of it to some extent, so that you can experience emotion again by looking at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's that kind of thing as well, that sort of like, earlier on the year, we did something with, another sort of Beeston-based artist called Claire Bentley-Smith.
Oh, yes.
She did stuff all about the sort of the managed zone.
Yeah. And she used found objects, didn't she?
That's right, yeah.
I thought that looked absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it was. And it was interesting to see the response to it from people, actually, because, whilst the homelessness crisis, which is addressed in Jadine's work, is something that it doesn't matter where in the country, probably anywhere in the world, you could probably sort of get straight away what that's about. Claire's work was more, it was more sort of like pointed towards a very local, I hate to use the word problem, but when I say that, you know what I mean.
I know what you mean, like an issue.
That's
very
the word,
specific to that area.
But the debate in the basement around the work and how people were perceiving what was going on in the work was really interesting, actually, because it was almost like all the heat of the debate had gone from it. Mm-hmm. And, for the first time in a while, in looking at any post to do with that subject matter, it felt like people were actually sort of like reasoning things out. And
not sort of having an emotional knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah, because online I think things come across as very sort of, polemical and, I'm going to shout about this now, and because you're shouting, I'm going to shout, and everybody sort of piles in on top of one another, and it becomes an argument. And I think, when you look at sort of like, arguments on social media, it's very, very, very rare that you find an opinion that has changed by the time that you get to the bottom of that list. In actual fact, they seem to become more entrenched.
Yeah.
Because you can't get sort of nuance from typing things online. We have this sort of like phrase about the keyboard warrior and stuff.
Yeah,
that's absolutely true. Because it, and it does become a fight like that, because people go, my opinion states this, and I'm not going to change. But when you actually put people in a room face to face, this was the case at the opening. There was people who didn't like the work for what it said. There were people who were totally behind it. Mm-hmm. There was none of the sort of hypothetical shouting that you get on Facebook. They were actually sort of like really, really interesting debates about the whole thing.
And being considered and listening to each other.
Yeah,
that's great. Yeah, that's brilliant. So, Bruce, we always ask our guests the same 3 questions. The first one is, what do you absolutely love about Leeds?
I think over the years that I've been here now, coming here for education stuff, I think actually I would say the people that I've met over the years.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's been some sort of people who I feel sort of quite inspirational to me.
Yeah.
In terms of me deciding how to go about what I do here. Those people who I met at college, for instance, people like Derek Horton, who was the course leader and stuff, people like Phil, who I'm working with at the moment, all these people that I've come across, and it's quite interesting because it can be a very sort of a fractious thing in the arts, people agreeing and disagreeing with people over stuff.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately Leeds is a place that has always had this sort of thing of a very independent mindset about it. And it's that kind of like independence, I think, that leads to how people then start to sort of like address the things that they're doing.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I'm just going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what you say.
Yeah.
And then people will just sort of go, oh, okay, go and do it then.
Yeah, and also I think as well it fosters this thing of when you see other people doing things like that you do, that you can find at Slung Low, East Street Arts, there's Air Studios, you've got all these amazing places, and then surely that just encourages other people to say, oh well, look, these people are doing it, these people have just gone out and, you know, not necessarily followed the rules, or, you know, not gone down sort of the institution route. They've just decided to do it themselves in their own way.
Yeah, I think so, and that goes back to sort of like, you know, the 1960s sort of education system here. I think kind of like was, you know, part of that. There was that sort of, you know, the people who came here that were sort of quite radical in their sort of like approaches to teaching and things like that.
Yeah,
and that sort of mindset has embedded itself and continued.
Yeah,
within the city. And I think you kind of still see this, the kind of the ghosts of that to this day. Sort of like it persists.
It does, yeah.
And it continues to sort of, you know, to keep people working in that way, that
and to spawn new ideas and things as well.
Yeah.
And what would you say is something that you don't think is so great about the city?
Oh. It needs more coffee shops open till later at night.
Because they all shut about 5.
Yeah, it's like, oh, what's that all about? It's like, I don't really drink anymore.
Right.
So I'm like, you know, I need somewhere, you know, go somewhere and have a quiet drink where I can maybe get on with something, or, you know, whatever, or even just go out with people. It's like, but, you know, if you're not drinking anymore, what do you do?
Like a local pub environment, but for coffee drinkers.
Yeah. So I know there's a sort of like, you know, there's a sort of slight problem up here for people. Why would you want to go drinking coffee at 11 o'clock at night or whatever? But
if you're the kind of person who stays up all night,
exactly,
that's what you need.
yeah.
I don't think you get people fighting on the streets because they're so caffeined up.
Yeah, maybe.
Shutting time.
Yeah.
Last orders.
Yeah. Just lots of people with their hearts racing. Got things to do. Got a place to go.
Full
people
of
to see. Yeah. More ideas that can cope with. Pass me another coffee.
Well, you never know. We might be inspiring a new generation of people in Leeds. And someone goes, "Oh, that's a fantastic idea."
Yeah. I think another of the things about on the what do you like about Leeds side of things? Well, it's the independent music scene, which is something that I've always sort of. You know, been interested in the places that you can go to sort of to do. I mean, even, you know, out here we got Eiger in South Leeds and all that kind of stuff, and the Wardrobe. You know, I've seen some of the greats.
Yeah.
You know, Sam Rivers at the Wardrobe, or
wow.
You know, that was a great gig. But then equally they did this sort of, what's it called, Snapshot from Paris, which took all the sort of, you know, sort of underground music from and electronic stuff from Paris. And did a whole night based around that. That's quite a few years ago now. That's
a great idea, though.
Yeah.
Concentrating on one area and bringing artists in. That's brilliant. So the last question that we always ask people on the podcast is, even if you're a long-term resident of Leeds, can you tell us about a hidden gem that people might not know about?
I've got 2 things, both very close to each other. One that everybody will probably know about, and the other less so. Really great place for breakfast and coffee up on top of Beeston Hill is it's called what's it called now? Damn, forgotten the name of it. It's a yellow front on it. It's got an Italian in it. La Dolce Vita.
Oh really? Where's that?
It's just, if you go up Crossflats Park and sort of turn left and you're heading along towards the Co-op.
Oh, okay.
It's in that parade of shops about halfway along.
I've never been there.
Coffee's really nice. The breakfast's really lovely. I've been there loads of times and probably only on one occasion not had something that was the breakfast food in there. It's very, very tasty.
But sadly for you, of course, it doesn't stay open late enough at night.
Yeah. If that was open at 11 o'clock at night, that would be great.
That'd be your dreams come true.
Yeah. And the other place is actually the cemetery just along the road from there, on the opposite side overlooking the city. It's because, and I say probably everybody knows that one, because that's the cemetery where Tony Harrison's parents were buried, and that sort of famous, infamous maybe, poem V comes from.
Yeah.
But I always found it was because I used to live just on the edge of that when I first moved to the city nearly 20 years ago. And I just used to find that was a really nice place to go.
It really is.
Sit looking over the city.
And funnily enough, on our first podcast, the guest was Alan Lane from Slunglow.
Oh, yeah.
And he chose that as his hidden gem. And then when Mark Catley came on, he was fuming that Alan had chosen that because he said he introduced it to him. And he was really cross that he'd had it taken away from him as his choice. But I think probably Beeston Cemetery is going to get a surge of visitors because so many people have mentioned it. There's some beautiful old, amazing graves in there, aren't there?
Yeah.
And it apparently used to have a Victorian viewing platform where you can look out across the city. And they've sort of tried to refurbish that a little bit, and you can still get a really good view, I think.
Yeah, they did start to do it a few years ago, but I don't know what happened.
No.
Because they kind of seemed to remove the work that they've done after a while.
Yeah, it seemed to sort of tail off, which is a shame.
Yeah, they made a whole sort of like wall with a little railings there and stuff, and sort of flattened it out put paving stones down that part, but it's all kind of gone now. The paving stones aren't there anymore. It's just...
Oh, that's such a shame.
So I don't know what they've done about that. But yeah, it was really nice, even before that was there, to just be able to go. That was a nice spot, that.
Yeah.
I made a little video piece by the two gravestones up there one year, quite a few years ago now, where I just I did a thing of like sunrise over the city. And sort of catching it, sort of coming up behind one of those really large gravestones that's on that corner of the cemetery.
I bet that's great. Have you got that on YouTube or anything?
No, I haven't. It was back in the days of digital videotape, those little ones.
Right.
I think I've definitely still got it, but
you'll have to get it uploaded.
I need to transfer it to a modern format.
Yeah, which that can bring all sorts of problems, can't it?
Yeah. But yeah, it was nice to do that. And also I had this experience in there once. So I used to live just next to that, and each morning I used to cross through the cemetery to get the number 1 bus into the city when I was at university. And like one morning I was walking through the cemetery and I looked down, and there's this one gravestone, which quite often they topple the gravestones in there because of the movement of the land makes them unsafe, some of them. So the ones that are in fear of falling over, they knock them over on purpose.
Oh, right.
And so it was one of these stones which had been toppled, but there was a little channel underneath it, and I saw this face poking out from underneath it. It was like, oh, what's that? And it was a rat. But it was not a grey rat or anything, It was obviously someone's pet.
Oh.
And maybe it escaped or something. And it was because it was really sort of like, I wanted to come out and say hello and stuff. I was like doing that, and it come out a bit further. So that night I went back home and sort of tried to entice it out with some rat food, because at the time we actually had a rat, which we were keeping. We could save this rat here. So it was there for a few days, just hiding under the gravestone. So I'd leave it a little pile of food, and it'd come back and get it. But then I never saw it again after that. So I suspect probably Fox had a larger dinner one night than it normally would have. Yeah, but
you made his last days really good.
Yeah, I could have got rat as a play pal, but it never quite worked that way.
Well, that's a great story, and another reason why anyone should go and visit the cemetery. You never know what you might find. Yeah. Find yourself a new pet.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming along and talking to us. We'll put links in the podcast notes about Basement Arts Project, and
cheers.
People can have a look and hopefully come along and see all the things that you've got that you're showing.
Yeah, great. Cheers. Thank you very much.
Wait a minute.
So that was Bruce Davies. Again, what a great guest. Another person doing amazing things in Leeds. I'm sure that you really enjoyed listening to that episode of the podcast. And again, just check the notes and we will tell you how you can find out about his exhibitions, the things that he's got coming up, and how you can go along and maybe even get involved. This week, at the end of the podcast, for your listening delight, we have got a wonderful band called HiFi Richard with a song called Always Be the Same. And actually, it's quite a lovely little familiar link because Will Gurrey and his brother Owen Gurrey are HiFi Richard. And as you all know, Will is the producer of this podcast. So it's great to be able to include some of our wonderfully skilled engineer and producers' works within the podcast. Have a listen, 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 have a listen.
Stick it to the man, she said. You blew me out the door. And you sit hiding, honey, know just where you go. you know, as the months go by and the years they're passing on, and you know I will never be in the same groove, that's for sure. I don't know what the brother said, I don't know what the sister said, I believe it will always be the same. You know you don't give your time up, you leave me sitting alone. There was a good time, boy, but you're always off the phone. I ain't gonna waste my time with you. I'll tell you what I'm about to do. Underneath the smiles alone, you need to feel secure. You're talking up freedom, you still hope you find the one. Picking up the pieces you've been losing all along. To sing about another fate of where you keep going wrong. Listen to your heart, they say, I can hear between the beats. Somewhere in the motion, girl, you make me drag my feet.